When you're overwhelmed, just get out a pen and paper. What am I worried about? What's the outcome I'm trying to control? And what can I do? Not today, not later on today, not next week, just in the next 15 minutes, what can I do? And just do that. Most of the anxiety lives in questions 3 months from now. Most solutions live in the next 15 minutes. Most of us know the phrase, do the next right thing, but what does it actually mean? Many people hear do the next right thing and dismiss it as a slogan, yet it may be one of the most practical tools in recovery, and that's what Steve and I are going to talk about next. Welcome to the Sober Friends podcast. You're in the right place if you are looking to get sober, put down that first drink, all of those things. My name is Matt J. Steve is here. What's going on, Steve?
Good morning, Matt. Not much. Beautiful morning out here in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah. About time.
I was just out in the garden clipping some stuff, and alarm went off, like time to head in and do a little recovery podcast.
Good Lord, you're better than me. I did enough to prepare and eat breakfast, but going outside is not something I was ready to do or had the energy for yet.
Yeah. Walked the dog, came back, played in the garden. Here I am. I'm an early riser. I like being up early, especially in the summer when you get these warms. It's going to be very humid today. Not so hot, but very humid. So try to get out there early so I can get some things done.
Yeah, I think that goes into our topic, do the next right thing. You had your list and you started, so it didn't get to a place of being overwhelmed. Not so much for me. So why does this matter? It is easy in early recovery to get overwhelmed. One of the things that I learned is that you don't have to get overwhelmed with stopping drinking for the rest of your life. That's where the phrase one day at a time comes from, so that you don't have to worry about doing the next right thing for the next 20, 40, 50 years, which is such an overwhelming thing. It's about doing the next right thing just today. Just think about that next step. And I have found that so helpful in so many ways in my life. And I think that's the thing that makes this really helpful, of when you're overwhelmed, stop and write down the thing you're worried about, the outcome you're looking to control, the one action you can take just in the next 15 minutes, and then just do that action. I'm going to tell you, this is not something I'm always great at. And I would say you listening, you're probably not great at this either, which is why we're here. We're not perfect. In many ways, I learned a lot of this in Seven Habits for Highly Effective People, but it's recovery stuff. So you, Steve, have you been overwhelmed by a problem you couldn't do anything about?
Yeah, and there's no question about it. I mean, one of the things I needed to do when I came into AA is obviously I needed to cease drinking. I needed to stop drinking. Yep. And then, I saw something on social media the other day, is that the 12 steps aren't made to stop you from drinking. They're out there to give you a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening. And that if you get that, then the obsession to stop drinking will go away. And that made a lot of sense to me. Because when I came in, and I talk about this on this podcast, I talk about it at my meetings, is when I came in the first time in 95, I came in because I drank too much and I stopped drinking, and I thought, okay, that worked. I feel good, blah, blah, blah. And we know how that doesn't, for many of us, doesn't work out. Didn't work out for me either. So when I came back, I had to realize, there was other things I needed to work on. And one of the things I needed to realize is that I often, and another one you'll hear in the rooms, is that my first thought is always an alcoholic thought, And that is why I need to think about doing the next right thing, because my first thought, and it's not that I'm a bad person or that I'm, evil or anything like that. It's just not always, hasn't always been the right thing to do, right? And that's the truth. It always.
I want you to tell me more about that. What do you mean by your first thought is an alcoholic thought?
Well, I talk about many times, like something like the escape theory that I have, right? So when the shit starts hitting the fan, typically in any relationship that I'm in, is that I start thinking it's time to get out of this relationship and just move on and run. Like, that's the first thought. Even today, having been married for 20, I don't know, 24 years, I can still have that thought. It's not as prevalent. It doesn't happen as often, all that kind of stuff. But I can still have it like, man, that's really what I want to do. I just want to, I talk about it all the time. I want to head to the mountains and I want to get me a cabin and I just want to, so that's the type of thing. And there were other things, right? In my past, there were other things, and that would be how to manipulate a situation to get what I want, right? So,
right.
First of all, I was in sales my whole life. I manipulated things all the time to get what I wanted in sales. I did. Right. And there's fine lines between, we talked to our buddy John, who also is in sales, goes to the Monday night meeting. He and I talk about it all the time. It's like, our job is to convince people to buy things that maybe they didn't want to buy, or at least they didn't want to buy it at the price I was selling it. Like, the people always wanted to buy what I had. My thing was pretty much price negotiation. So I always had to try to manipulate people, right? Try to, do like, hey, these things are in short supply, whatever it might be. So, I always had that in my life, right? Because I spent 30 years in sales and somewhat doing that kind of stuff. And that carries over, right? Carries over to relationships. It carries over to whether, if I'm trying to get something out of a relationship with my wife, I want something. Am I being manipulative? Am I being self-centered? When I look at a situation, am I being self-centered on this situation? Am I being selfish on this situation? That's what I mean. Like, that's the first thought. If I want something, like, and today I really do. Today I try to take other people's feelings, thoughts, considerations into consideration myself. And it's an ongoing thing. Like, some people do this naturally. Some of us in recovery need a lot of help. I needed a lot of help. I needed to be taught to do that. I needed not only to do it, I could always do it, but I needed to be taught to stop and pause, right? And then think about the situation and then check my motives, make sure I'm, and then make a decision. So I think that's what I talk about with that first thought is that, that pause that we talk about in our program all the time, taking that pause, taking that breath, and thinking about the situation before moving forward. That to me was taught to me by mostly the men in AA, and it's something I try to practice. I do practice to the best of my ability every day. Right? Some days it's better, some days it's worse, but I do try to practice that. So that's sort of the kind of thing. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone out there, but for me, it was always an ongoing struggle of. It was always about me. What's in it for me, right? That's what we hear about. What's in it for me? That was the big thing when I was before I came to this room. What's in it for me? What's part of my deal? And like I said, I can still do that today, but it's fewer and far between. And even when I do it, I know I'm doing it, and I'm doing it for a reason. Like, there's some times there's things I do like, there's something I want, and so what's in it for me? Let's negotiate this. Last thing I'll say about this is one of my favorite books, and I mentioned it here before. I'm so sad I gave that book away because I used to love to have it in my office. Man, I'll have to dig it up, but I'm sure I gave it away. The book was called Everything's Negotiable If You Know How to Play the Game. And it was exactly that. It was like, and this author's point was like, everything in life is negotiable. And I sort of absolutely bought into that. Like, everything in my life was negotiable. So, and then when I had bad motives, then it wasn't fun, right? Then it wasn't, I was liable to hurt people, not physically, but emotionally, hurt their feelings, piss people off. So that's what I think about when I think about my alcoholic thinking.
Well, this seems to be the difference between negotiable and manipulation, Because if I look at that phrase from the book, everything is negotiable if you know how to play the game, that could go one of two ways. It could be negotiating through a hard situation so that whoever the parties are come to a mutual win, or I could use it for evil and manipulate people into what I want. I'm realizing we're talking about John. Man, he'd be a good person to have on, to have a conversation with here. Because I think the thing I thought about when you brought him in is I can tell he's a good salesperson by hearing him talk. And I wonder how often is he trying to do a sales job on himself? That's what came to my mind of like, when are you the difference between working with other people or you're trying to sell and negotiate with yourself? And sometimes that is a manipulation to justify something. Almost like this is the evil bifurcation of what we're talking about of how do I negotiate getting to that place of, hey, it's okay if I don't get everything I want or do everything I'm looking to do, because if I am too focused on that, I'll get nothing done. Or it's how do I manipulate a situation to get those things, but I am losing some of my integrity in doing it.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the whole point, right? Again, some people do this on a regular basis. Some of us, like John, and again, John and I have had plenty of conversations about being in the sales business. And it's always, right? And that's the whole point, that integrity piece, right? And you're absolutely right. And that's why I talk about how I love the book. And maybe that's why I got rid of it, is because there is a fine line between negotiating hard and manipulation, right? And any negotiation, any real sales, right? I mean, think about, especially if you think about the reputation of used car salesmen, right? Or even new car salesmen, right? That slimy person going in, I got to go talk to my manager. Like, if you've ever bought a new car in the last 30 years, you know how that works, right? We've all been through it. There's manipulation there. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line between it. Now, when you're doing it for a business and you're trying to put food on your table, it's one thing. I will tell you this. When I first started in sales, years and years and years ago, one of the things I did is I did in-house sales for security systems, right? And so we did those are like the tough sales, right? Think about door-to-door salesmen. And they weren't door-to-door. People called up. I had appointments when I went to these things. But I would go in, and those were real sales. Like, those were tough closing sales. Those you're really trying to get. I was selling alarm systems back then that a full system at full price probably would cost you $3,000 to $4,000.
Wow.
And then, my best, and obviously I got paid the most when I sold that full price, right? And I could discount, and then I made less and less money depending on how much I discount. And that was a lot of manipulation. That was a lot of talking, right? You talk about the fair thing, all that kind of stuff. But one thing I always prided myself in, if I walked into a house and I knew that person wasn't capable of really making that decision, they were older, or if they weren't capable of using that system, like I could put it in, but they weren't capable of using it because I just knew they didn't have it, I would not sell that person. I had some integrity there. And I had a couple sales where they went bad, and people were unhappy. Matter of fact, I sold a woman up in stores. Her husband had the chemistry building named after him. He had passed. He was a professor there. She can afford this thing, and she never, and she could not figure out how to work it. Now, I did not get that sense when I was with her. And there was a lot of feedback. And I was always isolated from that. Like, once I made the sale, the front office took care of everything else, right? So if any bad feedback came back, they handled that. They went through. Yep. They send up text, stuff like that. But I felt bad. And I can remember, and again, this is not patting myself on the back. And this is long before I found the rooms. I went into a house once, and this woman told me this sad story about her granddaughter growing up. So her daughter was raising this child, no food in the house, blah, blah, blah. I got on the phone and called DCS, right? And put this woman on the phone and like, here's what, like, and again, I stopped selling this woman and felt, oh, there's something bigger going on, right? So I've had the ability to do that. Now, that was long before, again, I will say that was long before I was in my 20s, before I crossed this imaginary line, whatever it was, and became a full-blown alcoholic, where I really, like, that, things switched when I became that, when I could no longer do anything but drink. Things switched in my brain. And I'd be willing to bet back then, I'd be willing to sell you anything for any price if I needed to get money to buy my drug of choice, which was alcohol at the time. I did a lot of manipulation at the end of my drinking with not good intentions. So I always tried to do it. Today, listen, the reason why I go to meetings, the reason why I show up, the reason why I go to Monday and my Wednesday and my Friday and then do other stuff is because I need to be reminded of these things. I need to be reminded of this topic. I needed to be reminded of the topic of Friday night's meeting, of more or less life on life terms. That's a regular topic in AA. Comes up a lot in discussions groups. And, you can get bored of those topics. But the nice thing about that is you always hear shares on those things that you go, oh, I didn't hear that before, right? It's always different. So I go to those things so I could hear other things going on in other people's lives, and I could see how they deal with them. And that gives me an idea of how I might deal with them. Listen, there are people out there today that I respect, and they say it all the time. I don't make any major decision without calling somebody up and running it by another alcoholic, just so I can get a clearance, right? Like, hey, I'm thinking of changing jobs or whatever. Like, if you're young enough, you still work. I'm thinking of changing jobs, and I don't like where I'm working. Think about it, go through it, sit down with somebody and work through the pros and cons. I never had those type of conversations before in the past. I never had that support group that I could do that type of stuff. That is why I go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, because they help me try to do the next right thing.
Right. That's a great best practice. If you don't do that, make sure you have a good group of people that you connect with in sobriety. And if you are going to make major decisions, absolutely go and run it by people, because others have gone through what you have gone through, and they can help you do a little self-discovery. Maybe come back and ask you some questions. Why are you looking to change jobs? What is it about this job that excites you? What made you think about leaving the current job? And it might uncover a few things of either, boy, you're making an emotional decision that's wrong, or, you're underselling yourself.
Right.
And give you that confidence that you actually have done the next right thing. I think through that next right thing being a challenge and causing me to freeze, because I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's going to succeed. And I want to skip to the end to figure out if it's actually going to be successful. Otherwise, I don't know if I want to do it. If I could just know what the end result's going to be, then it's fine. But if there's uncertainty, well, what the hell am I going to do? Yeah. And that causes me to do nothing. It's less. It ends up being less to me about making the next right decision. It ends up being making a decision.
Yeah.
And making no decision is a decision in and of itself.
Absolutely.
But that piece of I'm uncomfortable with this, or I don't know, or I'm having to take a risk, becomes a problem. And that anxiety, I ended up medicating over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be. I can't think. I can. It could be something big. Remembering that I was kind of offered a job to apply 20 years ago, and being freaked out that I don't know if I can do this job. And in reality, I probably could have, but I'm glad I went through the process of not getting that job, because I don't think it would have been right for me long term. But there is that panic and anxiety and resistance to change. And there's definitely a lot of ADHD stuff here. there's comorbidity with alcoholism, drug addiction, and ADHD. And I can think a lot of those situations where that anxiety came up because I'm going through a decision tree and there's a risk. Those are the times I reach for the bottle. And when you go into recovery, the bottle as the solution goes away. So I've got to find another decision tree to make the next right thing, because I also don't want to get stagnant and just be stuck and say, well, I don't have a tool to get through that decision, so I'm just going to do nothing forever. That's not going to be helpful either, and that could cause other problems in life. And then you may reach for the bottle because you made no decision and life around you changed. So, yeah.
That decision, perilousness, paralyzing yourself, being unable to make a decision is a term for it, is something I struggled with too. And you're absolutely right. There'd be so much anxiety over making that decision when I was in my cups, as they say in the book. I would drink over it. But I thought of something real life. I know I've talked about it here. A real life experience of doing the next right thing. Here's a perfect example, and a devastating one in my own life, right? I talk about it when I came into the program in 95. And stopped drinking. Went, after a couple years, 2, maybe almost 3 years. I don't even think, we'll say 3 years in the program, not doing any real work. But doing a lot of meetings, doing a lot of stuff, right? But just not doing any step work. Going out, meeting my sponsors, doing biblical studies, Joe and Charlie's, all that kind of stuff. But decided I needed to go home, be a husband, blah, blah, blah. So I did that. And literally a couple years later, 2 years later, like my life was not, I wasn't happy. And I've told this story before. I wasn't happy. And I started, wondering why I wasn't happy, and thought, okay, it must be my marriage. It must be that I'm married to the wrong woman. And I never, because I had removed myself from AA, I never spoke to that decision to anybody, and made that decision on my own to get a divorce from my wife. And it was an absolutely uprooting, devastating decision for my family at the time, for my kids, for my wife, never did anything wrong, supported me through all of my stuff. And it was a very selfish, self-centered decision that I never ran by anybody. It was not the next right thing to do, right? Perfect example. It was not the next right thing to do. And I know today that had I been working this program, and had I been working closely with the sponsor, and had I been going to this men's meeting, which I'm going to today, I would have gotten feedback. And people would have challenged my thinking on that decision. Doesn't mean I would have made it, wouldn't have made it. I don't know, right? I don't know what the future would have brought. All I'm saying is that I would have gotten feedback that would have been different than me sitting alone. Even though I went to therapy, I talked about it with therapists, all that kind of stuff. It would have been totally different. I don't know if it would have changed anything, right? I really don't. But I do know that I would have felt better, because that was a big part of my 4th step, right? And that's exactly, that's a real world example of, not having the next right thing and not having some support when you need to make a big decision.
I got to thinking here when you started talking about marriage and how marriage is hard, marriage is long. And I think if we're all honest, at some point we kind of get sick of our spouses. You really love the bowl of Frosted Flakes at first. That bowl of Frosted Flakes is like the greatest thing ever. And you're committing to eating a bowl of Frosted Flakes for the rest of your life. And you get tired of it. And there are ways you can trick your mind in saying, this marriage is bad. And there are bad marriages. There are bad things that happen.
Right. Absolutely.
And it sounds like to you, hearing your story, it's just the simple boredom
Yeah.
was the thing that busted it up, which I think is a normal thing. And I think is a regular reason people leave marriages is just general boredom and comparing it to how do I feel now versus how did this relationship feel in the past? And you're going to lose that every single time because there's no way that you keep up that level of a dopamine hit. So making those right decisions just in the moment of what am I feeling, and that's where talking to somebody really can help. You made me think of a podcast I listened to this week that has nothing to do with recovery. Rich Eisen just started a limited series called This Was SportsCenter, where he is interviewing classic people involved with SportsCenter. And it speaks to me because if you're like somebody who watched SportsCenter in the 80s and 90s especially, to me, that's the golden era. And his first episode was with Dan Patrick, who, if there's anybody who's Mr. SportsCenter, it's Dan Patrick. Right. And he talks about his own make the next right decision, which was to leave ESPN, that he had a contract that was pretty lucrative, but he got the pressure of you need to be home more. And I think he was I don't know if you know Connecticut or whatever. I think he tapes it in Milford now.
Yeah, he does.
And I think he might live in the Milford area. So he was traveling from Milford to Bristol. If you don't know Connecticut and you think about an armpit, that's where Bristol is, in the middle of the state. And there's no direct way there from the shoreline. So he was driving long hours to do this stuff, and he's working not 9 to 5 hours. And you're doing a lot to not be there with your family and not to be around with the kids. And his wife said, if you do this next deal, it's the difference between the kids are here now and the kids won't be at home when the contract's up. So what do you want to do? And he made a very difficult decision to leave and go and do his own thing, where he went from working in Bristol to, at start, the people who helped him with his show early on had to come in the back door of his house, up the stairs, and into the attic to tape the show. That's where he started taping his show, in his attic. Not much different than what we're doing now. Tape the attic and get that show off the ground. And it was a tremendous risk, but it allowed him to be there for his wife and there for his family in that time of life that was really, really important. He's very successful with this thing now. He's not in his attic anymore. He's got a state-of-the-art studio and video, but there was no guarantee that it was going to work out for him. And although that's not recovery in and of itself, it kind of is. That you have to think through and sometimes do the next right thing is very risky or could feel risky. And you want to work away from that decision, because if I go with the safe decision, I kind of know how it might play out. If I go for the risky thing that I think is actually better for me and better for the family and better for my situation, damn, that could go sideways. And then what happens? And then do I pick up a drink? And sometimes it's the risky decision that is the right one. And that could come down to the next right decision is I'm going to stop drinking. Well, shit, what if I do that and I have no way of getting through situations now? You got to find a way through. So I'd love to make this actionable for you. When you're overwhelmed, just get out a pen and paper. What am I worried about? What's the outcome I'm trying to control? And what can I do? Not today, not later on today, not next week, just in the next 15 minutes, what can I do? And just do that. Most of the anxiety lives in questions 3 months from now. Most solutions live in the next 15 minutes. If anything, recovery's taught us you don't stay sober forever. You stay sober just today. And this is, if you were looking and saying, well, you didn't teach me how to drink responsibly or how not to drink at all. We taught you emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety is trusting that I can handle the next step without knowing the entire path. And you don't have to solve your problem today or for your whole life. You don't have to solve your problem your whole life. You just need to figure out the next couple of minutes. All right. If you like this, tell somebody about it. Click subscribe and rate and review on all the major podcast apps. Steve, thanks for doing this with me today.
Glad to be here, Matt.
We'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody.